In a recent interview with the BBC, director Gareth Edwards had this to say about his new movie Jurassic World Rebirth.
The goal was, and I said this to the crew at one point, was that it should feel like Universal Studios went into their vaults and found a reel of film and, brushed the dust off, and it said Jurassic World Rebirth. And wanted it to feel like a film they'd discovered from the early 90s or something.
And I thought this was really interesting because I feel like it points to the emergence of a new wave in legacy sequels. What do I mean by that? Well, we've been having legacy sequels for decades now, and looking back, I feel like we can map out that evolution and categorize some of these movies into distinctive waves that each have their own specific characteristics. Of course, these are not perfect, they're not neatly divided by time, there's always overlap, there's always movies that defy the category you put them in to some extent, but it's just a rough sketch that I think helps us to understand the evolution of the legacy sequel in the past few years, and that maybe even helps us to predict where they're going right now. So the first wave is mostly limited to the 2000s, I'd say. If I had to label it with one recurring idea, I think it would be that of One Last Ride. These were legacy sequels that were mostly made by the original director and starring the main actor or the classic actor from the original movies as the main actor in this legacy sequel. So you have Rocky Balboa and Rambo, both starring and directed by Sylvester Stallone. There's Scream 4, directed by Wes Craven, who also directed the originals. There's Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, starring Harrison Ford and directed by Steven Spielberg. And maybe also a movie like Live Free or Die Hard, which wasn't directed by the original director, but still had John McClane, Bruce Willis, as the main hero and the main actor of that character. And again, the point of these movies was to have these classic heroes and give them sort of that one last outing, to give them that one final adventure. They are stories that mostly function to close a chapter. They deal with themes such as legacy, letting go, moving on, that sort of stuff.
Hey, Paulie. That beast is gone now. The beast is out.
So if we can label this first wave as One Last Ride, I'd say the second one can be called Passing the Torch.
What'd you say your name was?
Don.
I'd say that this wave roughly started in the 2010s, where we saw new directors being brought on to these existing franchises and being given the chance to create a movie within the universe that they themselves were once a fan of. So that's J.J. Abrams doing The Force Awakens, that's Colin Trevorrow doing Jurassic World, Ryan Coogler doing Creed, and maybe some other ones like the new Scream, Good Day to Die Hard, and Independence Day Resurgence. So the idea here is that we still have many of the main characters from the originals, but they now mostly function as secondary characters to a new cast of new heroes. And it is sort of implied in these stories that these new heroes are the ones that are going to carry the torch forward, that are going to carry this franchise into a new era. And what you see here is that there's still somewhat of a balance between nostalgia and fan service on the one hand, and genuinely trying to set up something new on the other, to give the franchise a new direction to move forward in. Jurassic World wanted to set up this idea where dinosaurs roam the world and, we get the Jurassic World. Star Wars, the sequels, were obviously meant to be a continuation of a new story. And, many of the other movies that came in with a new cast were set up in a way that those stories could continue in some form or another. Scream of 2022, I think, has gotten like 2 sequels at this point. And so again, there's that idea of passing the torch, of giving a franchise from one generation to the next one. But, and this is where we get back to what Gareth Edwards said about Jurassic World Rebirth, I feel like here we're seeing, in the 2020s, we're seeing a new wave emerging that has all the characteristics of the second wave, but also is different enough that I feel like we can call this something else. That feels different enough that I feel confident that we're entering into a new era, where the main defining trait is that it's not so much trying to set up something new anymore as much as it is just reviving the old. In some way I think Gareth Edwards captured it perfectly by that idea that he wanted the movie to feel, or you wanted Jurassic World Rebirth to feel like it was actually made in the 90s. And I feel like this is also what we saw with Alien Romulus, and to a lesser extent now with the new TV show Alien Earth, where it feels very clear that these filmmakers are no longer trying to add their own creative vision, their own originality to it, but are just literally trying to recreate the first stuff, the original stuff. You know, Alien Romulus was very much reminiscent, you know, not just in terms of story, but also just aesthetically and visually of the original Alien. And that's also what Alien Earth did very, very clearly in that opening scene. I think that filmmaker also talked specifically about wanting it to feel like it was filmed by Ridley Scott back in the 70s. And so that feels distinctively different to me than the previous wave in which filmmakers were at least trying to push into a new direction. Whereas here it feels like we're just trying to reclaim a lost past. And while none of this so far has necessarily been like a value judgment, you know, it's just an observation of how I think these legacy sequels have evolved over time, I do can't help but feel like this is a bit of a shame that that we've come to a point where we're no longer even trying to add some of our own vision to it, you know, add something about our own time or the time that we live in, you know, our generation, that we've come to a point that we're just trying to recreate the stuff that generations before us made, you know, decades ago. Because I think the somewhat insidious thing about this new wave is that it kind of tricks you into thinking a movie or a TV show is better than it is, because it is just such a convincing copy of the original, when in reality it is just still a counterfeit. Before you go, I have a very brief message for any other creators or potential creators. This is not a sponsored video, but I do want to talk very briefly about MusicBed, which is a website I've been using for many years as a place to license my music, which, as you know, is very important in the main video essays that I make on Like Stories of Old, the main channel. It's one of the few websites that actually added a useful AI implementation, in the sense that you can now search for music by using another track. So for example, on the main channel I have a video coming out about David Fincher, and I wanted some music that feels like his movies, but I obviously can't use his original soundtracks because then you get into copyright trouble. And so instead what I did is I just used some of his soundtracks to search for music on MusicBed that is similar to that. So that's been very helpful, but that's not even the main reason I wanted to talk about MusicBed. The other reason is that they just launched Sounds, which is something that I've been waiting for years, basically, because it adds sound effects or sounds to their library. And this is also like one of those subtle things that you use a lot as a creator, you know, it's those clicking sounds or transition sounds, or, you know, whatever else kind of sound effect that you might want. But again, those are also hard to come by, as they also tend to be copyright protected. And so now it's very great to have MusicBed as this one place to get everything I need for the sound design of my videos. And of course, I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't have anything to offer for you. Again, this video is not technically sponsored, but MusicBed has always been sort of a soft sponsor of me, in the sense that they gave me a creator link that if you sign up by using it, you get an extra 14 days for free. There's more information on the affiliate page, so if you are a creator or interested in creating anything that requires sound and music, check it out in the description, and I'll see you in the next one.